From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, this is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We start once again today with the markets. Abigail Doolittle. So I thought there were things that were going to keep these markets down, but they sure aren't. These markets will not stay down, Abigail.
There's interesting action here once again. Lots of volatility, not just in recent days, but on the year. And right now we do have markets slightly higher. I think it's surprising, not just you, David, but many folks out there expecting that the unrest that we're seeing here in the U.S. would affect the financial markets to the downside. That's really not what we're seeing, perhaps because it tells us that traders do not think that the unrest in its current form, as unfortunate and sad as it is unlikely to affect the corporate profit outlook. So it's a little bit different than the divergence we're seeing on the year between the awful economic data and stocks being higher, investors thinking that we just look past to next year. Whereas again, right now, investors telling us that they think it probably is not going to affect that U.S. corporate profit outlook. One question could be, though, David, with the proximity of the protesters, could it spark some sort of spike in the virus? Hopefully not. But if that happens, that would certainly affect the corporate profit outlook and probably stocks in the future. Today, though, we're looking at a move still into the cyclicals, the financial sector in particular being helped out by a steepening yield curve. One area of weakness around China, because of course there's heightened China tensions, chips trading lower on the day. And on the year, lots of room, though, still for those cyclicals to make up, given the fact that the S&P 500 down about 6%, the cyclicals and ETF there down about 18%, leading the way still, David, those FANGs, that stay-at-home trade.
Yeah, as you say, Abigail, a lot of us thought that perhaps the markets would really take a hit because of those horrible protests as a result of the killing of George Floyd over the weekend. They didn't react to that. On the other hand, we were really worried, if you remember, late Friday, that President Trump would be going after China, and yet the stocks didn't react too negatively to that either. Even when we learned today agricultural imports might be cut into China from the United States. Is that because the president warned more than he actually did? Probably
so. That was more a case of talking the talk and less about walking the walk. So I think that there are a lot of traders out there who are expecting pretty severe sanctions. And because that did not go into place, markets at the end of the day on Friday were actually slightly higher. At one point, they had been down 1%. So again, looking past that, and today we have China saying that they are going to cut some of their agricultural purchases here from the U.S. That's really not affecting either. So traders, to some degree, pricing all of this in. I think it will really need to escalate to the point where, again, it's going to affect the numbers and not just the psychology of the markets, David.
Okay, Abigail, thank you so much. That's Abigail Doolittle on the markets. As we say, last Friday, President Trump had a news conference at the White House in which he warned more sanctions against China, as well as saying he's going to pull out of the World Health Organization. Then today, we heard that China may be cutting back on agricultural imports, but nevertheless, the markets didn't really react. Well, Larry Summers, a Wall Street Week contributor and former Treasury Secretary, talked to us on Wall Street Week, and he warned, don't be too complacent about what the markets are indicating about U.S.-China relations.
The fact that there's no market response shouldn't make people complacent, not about the United States abandoning the World Health Organization and not about the state of the U.S.-China relationship.
That was Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary. We welcome now Michael McKee. He is Bloomberg Chief Economic and Policy Correspondent. So Mike, give us your take on what's going on here. Let's start with China, first of all. There was a time when the markets just moved with respect to what President Trump even said in a tweet about China, up or down. Have the markets sort of gotten past some of the trade threats here?
Well, they probably haven't gotten past it as much, David, as they've been overwhelmed by other news, although we have lived with the trade wars for quite some time, and so markets have sort of priced it in. We're tied together now in terms of the COVID virus and how things are moving forward, whether we will recover, because the economy is dependent on trade between the two so much. And you look at the numbers that came out over the last 24 to 36 hours in terms of China and U.S. PMIs, and you can see that they're both kind of about in the same place, a very slow recovery. Now, the Chinese were a little bit faster than us to come back because they brought the factories back a while ago, but they did see their ISM number, their PMI number, decline in the last month after a quick rebound, just a little bit softer because they're not selling things to the United States. We're still coming out of lockdown, so our numbers are still bad, but they do show a stabilization. The ISM in the U.S. coming in at 43.1. That's recessionary territory. So we're not seeing a whole lot of improvement but the two countries do have sort of a path that's tied together going forward in terms of the recoveries.
Yeah, and maybe tied together in yet another way, which is the degree of governmental support for the economies. Obviously, we have a lot of support, monetary and fiscal, here in the United States. At the same time, Premier Li Keqiang overnight said, you know, we will do what we need to do to support the Chinese economy. So to what extent is this really not a question of what the trade relations is, but basically people in the markets believe those governments will really support the economy no matter what?
Well, the markets seem to believe that. There's been a lot of anticipation in the Chinese markets about how much additional assistance and stimulus they would provide. Everybody's been waiting on the central bank to cut their main interest rate. They've cut all their other interest rates. And of course, after the National People's Congress, they talked about doing more in terms of local stimulus for businesses. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But they have the issue of civil unrest, which of course appeared here. But civil unrest because a lot of people didn't have jobs there. So the expectation is the Chinese will do more. But remember, they also control their economy from the top down. And when something happens like this dispute between the president and the Chinese can react much more quickly. And that's what we've seen with the soybean sales. We saw soybean sales start to rise a little bit this year as the Phase 1 trade deal came into effect. And now we're starting to see it drop off. Now, the numbers are low because this isn't soybean harvest time in the U.S., but working down the stockpiles and the possibility of selling more later in the year is what people are worried about if the Chinese are really going to cut us off.
So pick up on civil unrest just for a moment there to conclude this, Mike. We did see those demonstrations throughout the weekend, continuing into last night as well. Give us a sense historically of what the United States has done when we've had this kind of unrest. We may not have really had this kind since 1968, but how do the markets react to that? Normally you'd think the markets would sell off, but they certainly didn't so far this week.
Well, you would think so, but historically markets don't do that. You go back to 1968. We had the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and those came after the Tet Offensive in Vietnam first raised the possibility that we were losing that war. A lot of people forget, we had a Hong Kong flu outbreak that year as well. So it was a really terrible year for the United States with demonstrations constant. We had the riots in the summer, and yet the S&P 500 went up for the year, and so did the Dow. Significantly. They bottomed in March after the King assassination, and then almost for the entire rest of the year, they rose. So as one person put it today, markets are not about the happiness of people, and markets are not about the overall fundamentals of the economy. Markets are about what kind of profits a company makes. And if people think companies are going to make profits, the market's going to go up no matter what's happening around the edges.
Mike, thank you so much for being with us. It's Michael McKee. He's our Chief Economics and Policy Correspondent. Coming up here, we're going to talk with a Congresswoman who was pepper sprayed in a protest over the weekend in Columbus, Ohio. She's Joyce Beatty, Democrat, of Ohio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. Columbus, Ohio is one of the places where there were protests over the weekend as a result of the killing of George Floyd. And one of a congressman was actually caught up in it. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio was pepper sprayed as part of that protest, and we welcome her now. Thank you very much for being with Congresswoman Beatty. So give us a sense of what happened there on that sidewalk. We've seen some video of it. There were protests going on, there were police, and then all of a sudden there was pepper spray, and you were pepper sprayed, as was the head of your city council.
Well, it was a peaceful, arranged, and designed protest. I wanted to be there because I felt the same pain, the same anger, the same frustration, wanting to lend my voice to be heard in an effort to hopefully come to some type of resolve. The nation watched as George Floyd was killed. The nation watched as Ahmaud Arbery was shot down. We also had then Breonna Taylor, and we could continue to go back further. I think there was a lot of pent up rage to how much do we have to continue to witness? You know, there has to be something we could do. And I was very pleased to go down there. And I can tell you that it was a very peaceful, well organized protest. Unfortunately, certainly, as you know, and if you've watched over history, one push, one shove, one police officer being a little over aggressive starts a rippling effect. Some young gentleman, I'm not sure what happened, but if you've seen the footage, he was hurled over the bicycle to the ground. And then there was a young female who had been expressing her pain during the whole time, and she was pushed. I was trying to lunge to reach for her, requesting, let's not excite the folks, this is wrong. And because I have later learned those officers were the strike force in riot gear and had been up that Friday night with those, which I don't condone, people tearing up our city. Many of those not our activists, not our individuals who are from here in our community, just destroying businesses. And that's destructive and certainly distracting from the movement, because many of those businesses were also small businesses, minority business, female owned businesses. So once the brawling started after a perfect, peaceful march, out of the blue, unexpected, came the pepper spray. And it was not directed directly at me. I want to be fully transparent, but pepper spray is not directional. So if you are 6 inches over here spraying at someone else, it hit our president of city council face on and only from the side with me. Certainly an experience you do not want to have.
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for laying that out. But as you laid that out, it pointed out something on both sides, perhaps, which is the majority of police officers are doing their job the way they should. It only takes one or two that step over the line. Similarly, on the protester side, the night before you say there were some, at least, that were not necessarily peaceful protesters. What's to be done about this on the police side? Is this a matter of training? Is this a matter of accountability? Should we be holding them to account and getting rid of more of the bad police officers, as some people are talking about?
I think it's all of the above. You know, when you watch live footage from a body camera on the same police officer that has his knee on the neck of someone who is not resisting, someone who is handcuffed to the point that the man dies, I think you have to do more than protest. I think protesting is only a beginning to allow us to express our pain for over the years. And it's our calling out to have something done. Now, I think it comes back to different protocols. You cannot legislate away racism. And certainly racism still exists. Disparity still exists. We're in the middle of the coronavirus, and African Americans are dying at great numbers than what they represent in the states and the nation. So when you take all of this into account, laws must change, protocols. It is a culture that we have to invade and set a different tone. And that starts with the leadership in the cities, the governors, the police officers, the elected officials like myself. And I'm very proud that we are starting to do those things. History repeats itself, but we must be bigger and better than that. The Congressional Black Caucus has an emergency meeting today with great ideas that involves all of it, how to write legislation, how to set up conditions and demands and protocols. Right here in my hometown, in my community, there are a variety of meetings all day today that are more than just doing the same old thing, because we see where that has gotten us.
Well, that's exactly what I'd like to talk about, because there is the police element that needs to be addressed when you see what happened to Mr. Floyd. It's just incomprehensible what happened. That has to be addressed. But there are larger factors here. I'm glad you mentioned the pandemic, because the fact is a lot of the disproportionate effect on blacks, and by the way, on Hispanics as well, is because of their conditions. That the fact is they have a higher incidence of diabetes, higher incidence of hypertension. They often are in jobs where they have to be close to other people. They have poor health care. What can we do? What can you do as a congresswoman? What can you do to start changing the system, not just around the edges?
I think we have to rip off these years and layers of discrimination. When we just put monies into Congress through our heroes budget, we need to make sure people understand that that is an amazing step because we made it about all of those individuals you just mentioned, those individuals who are on the front line, our heroes and sheroes. We made it about small businesses. We made it about state and local government. If we don't stand up for them and give them the funds, if we don't carve out dollars to make sure that individuals, not individuals like you and I only, but individuals, those who are homeless, those who fall between the gap. We put $1,200 into our PPP plan for them in our CARES Act. That was not enough. We saw that, we witnessed that. So what did we do? We came back to put more dollars in it. We have to come together if it takes registering more people to vote, if it means voting a change, because if you're not for the people and standing up for the people, you should not be representing the people.
Congresswoman, can you see a way to take the energy of these protests and direct it toward getting some of the things done you just talked about, such as your HEROES Act, which seems to be hung up right now in Congress, doesn't seem to be moving forward. That's on the Senate side, to be sure, not the House. But can you see a way of taking that energy and redirecting it and actually getting legislation through?
I am very hopeful that we would be able to do that. For the first time right here in Columbus, Ohio, you had the county commissioners tying poverty to racism. You have today at 3 o'clock, you will have the health department, the city of Columbus, tying health care to racism and making changes. We have contracts that we need to review to look at how can we make changes into the contracts. You know, we need to set up citizen and community review boards. We need to do old school and new school. You need to make sure that officers are in the community. You need to make sure that the community is engaged with the community and that there will be some consequences and accountabilities. And I don't think that's that difficult to do. I think right now, maybe this has been the thing that is bringing us together at this moment in time. Maybe this has been the chosen time, because certainly we know if something affects one of us directly, it affects all of us indirectly.
So, Congressman, it is more than understandable that so many people are protesting across the country. And is there a constitutional right to do so under the First Amendment? At the same time, do you have concerns that in this world of COVID, there are risks involved? I mean, you certainly had a mask on when you were pepper sprayed. The president of your city council had a mask on as well. But we've seen a lot of demonstrations with no masks on and large groups of people. And by the way, part of the state and local government money that's needed, that's going to be a problem if all the police forces are spending so much money on overtime. Is there some risk here specifically tied to the pandemic?
I think that it is, and certainly I am a proponent of making sure that at all times, whether you're outside or going to different places, that you wear a mask. Up until the time when we cross the street, there's other photos and footage that I was trying to be as careful as possible to keep my distance. I didn't take selfies. I didn't take photos close up. I did hold a sign with a constituent, and we made sure that we were 6 feet apart in doing so. But when we crossed the street, when we sensed there was a problem, I no longer became that leader. I became a Black woman knowing that I needed to be there to do something. And I wanted to be part of the resolve for those protesters who I believe were in their full rights. I wanted to be sure that I was there, hopefully being able to diffuse or to help us not get to the point where we had to have what we ended up having. But I am a huge proponent. I take it very seriously about wearing your mask. I understand we need to open up some parts of our economy. And if that is the pleasure of governors and others, I ask us to do it with great caution. And part of that reason is people are still dying. We are not through this. This is real. To all of the minority groups, because of the disparities, we are in greater numbers. So absolutely, I encourage people, if I'm around you and you don't have a mask on, I carry an extra mask in a sealed bag with me to give to people. So it is very serious and very important that we practice all of those things to keep us safe and healthy.
Yep. Very serious issues, no doubt about it. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for being with us.
Thank
That is
you.
Representative Joyce Beatty. She's Democrat of Ohio. And coming up here on Balance of Power tomorrow, we'll have a special interview with the chairman of the SEC. He is Jay Clayton. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. It's time now for Stock of the Hour. John Deere back in the crosshairs with all that talk about possible problems with imports of agricultural products from the United States to China. And Abigail Doolittle is here to explain it to us.
Well, Deere the shares, David, really are a bit of a proxy for the U.S.-China trade war. So, of course, this has been re-escalating more recently. Last week on Friday, President Trump not delivering a real blow to China as had been expected, but nonetheless a little bit of a re-escalation with the Hong Kong special status perhaps at risk. The Phase 1 trade deal is still on, however, but China, in retaliation, apparently is encouraging some of its state-owned ag companies to buy less from the U.S. Soybean numbers already going in the wrong direction into this. They were promising, of course, with the Phase 1 trade deal to buy about $37 billion worth of goods this year. So now it seems, David, as though that may be in jeopardy. It's not just soybeans, it is also pork. And relative to where China is going for soybeans, apparently Brazil at this time.
So Abigail, as you said, John Deere is a little bit of a bellwether. What about other agricultural related stocks? Are they getting hit as well?
A little bit of a mix, actually. So Archer Daniel Midland, that stock is down, whereas on the other hand, we have Bunge, the commodity trader, that stock is up. So a little bit of a mixed reaction. Relative to Deere itself, the reason that it's sensitive, its numbers have been going in the wrong direction. On the 2018 part of the trade war, that really bled into 2019. So sales going in the wrong direction. And then, of course, the virus hitting this year, taking numbers down as well. Soybeans have also been in a difficult spot near multi-year lows, holding support. So I think agricultural traders may be wondering whether or not this is going to put a crimp in that. But right now, holding on to long-term support, David.
Okay, thanks so much to Abigail Doolittle. Coming up next, we're going to have Gary Locke, the former U.S. ambassador to China, for his take on U.S.-China relations. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. It is time now for Bloomberg First Word News, and for that we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. As you have been reporting, violent protests are hammering dozens of American cities that are still recovering from the coronavirus lockdown. Stores were looted yesterday from New York to Los Angeles. Overwhelmed state and local officials are now getting help from thousands of National Guard troops. Thousands of demonstrators marched peacefully to protest the killing of a black man, George Floyd, by police in Minneapolis. But that was overshadowed by those who burned cars and fought with police. President Trump reportedly took shelter in a White House bunker Friday night when hundreds of protesters gathered outside. According to the Associated Press, Secret Service agents rushed the president to the bunker. He was said to have spent an hour there. Mass testing in the city of Wuhan may have eradicated the coronavirus there. Authorities in the Chinese city say they found no asymptomatic cases for the first time in nearly 2 months. Wuhan is testing its entire population of 11 million for the virus. Infected people who show no signs of being sick can still infect others. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Well, U.S.-China relations continue to deteriorate, with the president now threatening various sanctions against China, and China now reportedly cutting back further on agricultural imports. Welcome now the former U.S. ambassador to Beijing. He is Gary Locke. Before that, he was Secretary of Commerce under President Obama. And before that, he was governor of the state of Washington. So, Ambassador Locke, thank you so much for being here. It sure looks to us as if the relations with U.S. and China are really bad. Is it as bad as it looks?
Oh, the relations are very, very bad right now. It's getting worse, and the latest salvo involves taking away the special status that Hong Kong has previously received. That could impose tariffs on all products coming out of Hong Kong and may make it harder for residents of Hong Kong to even visit the United States. Unfortunately, trying to get at the policies of China in terms of not respecting the one country, two systems, the autonomy that Hong Kong has previously enjoyed. These types of actions may actually hurt the people of Hong Kong without really affecting the government or the economy of China. Really punishing the people of Hong Kong who have really been protesting for greater democracy and freedom. So this is really going to hurt the people, the very pro-democratic people of Hong Kong. And perhaps while sending a message to mainland China may not really hurt China itself.
Well, it has to take us back a bit in history. Back in '97, there was an agreement entered into by China as part of Hong Kong coming back to it and away from Great Britain. Is it just clear they violated that agreement? And perhaps more important, are there any remedies for a violation of that agreement?
Well, they're clearly violating the agreement to provide autonomy to Hong Kong at least till 20 more years or so. And China, of course, is upset that Hong Kong has not passed some security laws that it was supposed to have many, many years ago. So tensions have been very, very raw, and there was a lot of protests just last year over a proposal to allow extraditions of people charged with crimes being sent back to other countries, including the mainland China. And of course, there's little confidence in the rule of law in China that people could be prosecuted on trumped-up charges, and then if they're living in Hong Kong, maybe because they're voicing dissent about the policies or disagreeing openly with the policies of China, criticizing the Chinese government, that they could then be extradited to the mainland to face prosecution. So these are really tough issues. And again, China is, I think, hurting itself in the world if it takes away the autonomy of Hong Kong, and certainly will not help in trying to reunify Taiwan, because the people of Taiwan will say, how can we ever trust the mainland with any promises that they might have to maintain the democracy that is very, very strong on Taiwan?
We have the largest economy in the world in the United States and the second largest in China. We're going to have to figure out a way to deal with one another, one way or the other. Can you see a path forward to a constructive engagement with China going forward? Because I have to say, China has not had a great track record of complying with its agreements over the years, going all the way back to the WTO.
I think that the world stage and all the other countries in which China does business, has operations, has investments, and is a trading partner with, all of those countries need to work with the United States in confronting China. The United States doing it alone actually hurts Americans and actually benefits many of our allies. While they have the same concerns, this tariff trade war between China and the United States merely makes American products more expensive in China. And so the Chinese buyers will, purchase something from Germany, Australia, or Canada because it's so much cheaper. Well, those countries have many of the same concerns about the trading policies, the economic policies, the lack of intellectual protection, the lack of rule of law that we have over China's policies. But we should be working in concert with all these other countries to go after China's policies, to confront China instead of doing it alone, because then these other countries just sit back and their companies will get all the business because the products of their companies are so much cheaper, whether it's soybeans from Brazil or whether it's semiconductors from the EU or technological equipment, manufactured goods, lumber, Airbus airplanes instead of Boeing airplanes. I mean, this unilateral trade war between the United States and China actually benefits many other countries and is hurting American jobs.
Ultimately, it's clear that President Trump wants to get China to change its behavior. In your experience when you were U.S. ambassador to China, or more broadly over the years, have you seen the United States, either alone or with others, effectively change the Chinese government's behavior?
I think we've been able to, all through the years with different presidents, Democratic and Republican administrations, we've been able to tone down some of their rhetoric, force them to be a little bit slower and more cautious and less confrontational. They have, in fact, participated and partnered with the United States and our allies on a whole host of issues, whether it's fighting piracy off the coast of Africa, contributing to UN peacekeeping forces around the world. In fact, they are the largest supplier of peacekeeping forces to the United Nations. And they've obviously helped in trying to get Iran to stop developing a nuclear weapon. So a lot of those international efforts have been successful. China has its own ambitions. It's feeling its power and its success, economic, technological success, and they feel that they've been suppressed and shamed by Western powers for centuries, and they're really trying to reclaim what they feel is their place in world civilization. But many of their views obviously are not consistent with the rest of the world. And I think that to get them to change, to get them to be part of the world community, whether it's on trade policies, whether it's on military policies, respecting other people's borders and sovereignty, we need to have a united front with other countries instead of just doing it by ourselves, because it's not working.
So finally, Ambassador Locke, you have endorsed Vice President Biden. You are a Democrat. It doesn't look like anyone's going to get elected president this fall, in all likelihood, by going soft on China. Can you give us a Democratic position on China that really is materially different from what President Trump is doing?
Well, Democrats and Republicans have long had the same concerns about the trade and economic policies of China and their lack of enforcement of intellectual property, to not really upholding the rule of law, and certainly their crackdown on human rights and freedom of expression of the press and activists and even ethnic groups. We need to be sure that in our articulating our differences with the policies of the government of China, that we're not placing blame on the people of China, and certainly not profiling and stereotyping and discriminating against Chinese Americans here in the United States. And that we need to separate the people of China versus the government of China. Second thing that we need to do, and so we cannot engage in xenophobia, profiling, stereotyping, and racism. Number two, we need to articulate a position of working with other countries to confront China in terms of putting tariffs on their products, but on a global basis, not just the United States imposing tariffs. If China is going to restrict investments by foreign companies in China, then all the other countries of the world should be imposing those same type of restrictions on Chinese investment into other parts of the world and not just the United States. So the difference with the Democrats is that Democrats need to work in unison with other countries to really put effective pressure on China to change instead of just doing it United States versus China, because that clearly will not work. That actually hurts American companies, hurts American interests, hurts American workers and benefits the workers and the companies of other countries.
Ambassador Locke, it's always such a treat to have you with us. That's Ambassador Gary Locke, former U.S. ambassador to Beijing. Coming up here, we're going to have the Michigan sheriff that took off his helmet and marched with the protesters over the weekend. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. As we know, there have been protests all across the country over the weekend, but one in Flint, Michigan was a bit different because the county sheriff, Genesee County Sheriff, and he is Christopher Swanson, decided to take his helmet off. He had his people put their batons down. He joined with the marchers and marched with them, and we are now joined by Sheriff Christopher Swanson. Thanks for being with us, Sheriff. So give us a sense of, did you plan that in advance or was that spontaneous?
Boy, I sure wish I was smart enough to do that when I first walked up, but I could tell you it was 27 years on the job, experience, training, but most importantly, having a heart for people. And it was just a beautiful moment. There's a lot that led up to it. When we approached the crowd, we saw the anger. I knew that something had to be done different, and it made history.
Well, tell us about that, because we've seen and heard stories of other protests that some people are not just peaceful protesters. There have been some people there that are out to do some damage. How did you know going in there you didn't have any of those people? What would have happened to you and your people if, in fact, there had been some violence?
Well, I'm actually convinced there were rioters in there ready to be triggered, but the majority of the protesters who have righteous anger outnumbered those. And you can't pick who's there, what their intentions are. But I will tell you, as the tensions grew throughout the week, and in an 8-minute, 40-second video, it erased years and years of community police relationships. And every day that went by last week, it incited and it caused greater tension. And then, of course, Friday into Saturday, it let loose. Well, we knew these demonstrations were coming to Flint, and we had been watching and listening. We knew they were coming, and for the first 2 hours, we let the group swell to 100 or so, and we blocked traffic and moved along with them. But they turned towards the police department, and we saw what happened in Oregon. We saw what happened in Minneapolis, and what happened to CNN. And I thought, this is it. You got to fortify the line. So the local police department, that was the one that was in focus. They had the officers with our officers in battle gear, helmets, batons, what you see across the nation. And I literally thought, as I was walking up to it with my own helmet on, I cannot believe this is happening. Of all the good that we've done, a week before we were heroes through the COVID crisis, and now we're villains because of one bad act of somebody who had no business being a cop. And as I saw and felt the tension rise to epic proportions, we walked up to the line, and I'm telling you, it was intense. There was fear on both sides. Don't think cops are fearless. There was fear. And after about 15, 20 minutes, I saw a fist pump into the crowd. I don't know who instigated it. And I saw a little hug. And there was an officer, Chad Miller from Flint Township, that was right in the middle. I thought, that's it. We can talk. We can walk. And I took my helmet off. The officers dropped their batons. And I walked into the crowd, and I found a shot caller. And I said, brother, that guy is not who we are. And I gave him a big old bear hug. And I said, you need to tell me what I need to do. And they said, tell the people what you just said. So I said, get them up, get them around. And so we hollered out, hey, I want to tell you a message. And they listened, and they wanted to be heard. But the second question is what changed history. And that is, what else do I need to do? And they didn't even think twice. Walk with us. And what I saw was an instantaneous change of heart and soul from people that have righteous anger, but they had somebody that they could talk to. They have somebody in law enforcement. They have a white police leader that put all things aside. It's not about race. It's about dignity for all. And that moment set a stage that you could protest, you could have your voice heard as long as there's somebody to hear it and somebody to listen and walk with them. And that's what we did.
And Sheriff, I've seen the video, and it's an example of law enforcement the way we would all want it to be, the very best of law enforcement. But as you said, it all started with that policeman up in Minneapolis, somebody that you said should never have been a policeman. Is there a broader set of issues across America in police departments? Because the vast majority of policemen, I believe and have seen, are good. They do their jobs. They're hard jobs. They're courageous. But there seem to always be a few bad apples. Are police having a tough time weeding out those bad apples?
You know, that's a great question. I'm going to tell you, there's 800,000 cops in the United States, hundreds of thousands that go to work right now as we speak. And in one instant, a police officer in any jurisdiction can wipe away the public trust. So to my law enforcement brothers and sisters, we can't lose hope because we know we do it for the right reasons. Number two, there should never be a, quote, bad cop on any police department in the world, because if someone's bad, they don't deserve to be a cop. And law enforcement has a code. Law enforcement has a brotherhood, a sisterhood, but that doesn't protect wrong. And when wrong is wrong, we need to call it out faster and more aggressive because we're held to a higher standard. So you can't weed out bad apples in any profession, whether it's teaching, physicians, the ministry, it doesn't matter. But in law enforcement, there's a higher standard because we take an oath, we gain our public trust from the public, and when we don't act fast to discipline, to correct, or to terminate and charge, we've arrested our own people. I personally arrested my own cops who broke the law. There's one sitting in jail in the county next to me that I arrested because he committed a sexual assault while on duty. That's the kind of stuff. You can't even have a hint of minimizing. When wrong is wrong, call it out.
Yeah. Sheriff, really, thank you so much for being here. And really, I am impressed by what you did. Really pleased. That's Sheriff Chris Swanson, Genesee County Sheriff, and that is the county where my hometown, Flint, Michigan, resides. Coming up here, as we open up the country, there's concern about an uptick in coronavirus cases. We're going to be joined by Max Nissen to talk about exactly what the status is. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Well, as we open the economy back up, we hope we won't have too many more cases of coronavirus. But what are the data showing us? Welcome on Max Nissen of Bloomberg Opinion. He's a columnist there who really knows the healthcare system backwards and forwards. So, Max, is it too soon? Do we have any data yet on the early openers like the Georgias and the Floridas?
So, I think it's too early for entirely firm verdict. But what we can say is that I think people that expected, 2 weeks after the first reopenings, after the governors, made these changes to policy, you would see an enormous spike. That's not something that's materialized. But what you do see are a lot of different areas of concern where there is some case growth, North Carolina, Mississippi, several others. And then nationwide, what you see just because of the sheer variation in policy and in situations is this sort of high plateau of cases that's taking a really long time to come down. And that is a matter for concern because it means, a lot of cases and a number of deaths every day. But also, this is the situation where you have these sort of limited, slow reopenings. And on top of that, people taking additional personal precautions in terms of their behavior, in terms of wearing masks, companies being slow to ask people to come back. So the difficulty is that if you have that high degree of circulation, as states start to ease up and as people start to ease up more, heading into the fall when you have more people inside, that's how you create the potential conditions for those bigger spikes that I think we all fear, even if they're not so apparent right at this moment.
Max, where are we on a vaccine or a treatment? I know Gilead said today that, in fact, remdesivir, that people had some high hopes for, is not as effective as people thought it might have been.
Yeah, so this sort of confirms what I think has been the story of remdesivir's data that's read out to date. It does seem to have a real statistically significant impact on a subset of patients. Today's data in more moderate patients. But it's not the sort of thing you'd like to see in a treatment that would really kind of change the trajectory of a virus. It's pretty mild, and you continue to not see the really big impact on deaths that you'd like to see in anything that sort of changes how public policy or or the approach to the virus might be going forward. That, as I'm sure everyone knows, will take a vaccine. And while there definitely has been progress in terms of, Moderna starting a phase 2 trial, the AstraZeneca-Oxford effort moving forward, fundamentally that is going to take some time to create the sort of data you'd like to have before giving it out widely. You need to run big trials in places where the virus is circulating to get a sense of whether it's effective.
Right.
There are fewer of those places, and people are being more cautious. So collecting the sort of data package you need on safety and efficacy is going to be a difficult and time-consuming thing with so many vaccines in development. So I'm hopeful that it'll happen on those accelerated timelines we're hearing about, but it does fundamentally take a while.
Yeah, we all are hoping it's going to be pretty fast. We hope that it's going to be by the end of the year, the way the president said, but it's a high order, I think it's fair to say. Thanks so much to Max Neeson of Bloomberg Opinion, where he's a columnist on healthcare issues. That does it for the first hour of Balance of Power. We're going to continue on radio for our second hour of Balance of Power, and we're going to talk, among other things, with a former senior advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign about what's going on in the country. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.